Marcus Thompson thought he was better than everyone else. At 28 years old, he worked at a big bank in Providence. He made lots of money and lived in a fancy house outside the city. His father was a state senator, which meant Marcus always got what he wanted. When problems came up, his family's name and money made them go away. Marcus drove a bright red sports car that cost more than most people made in a year. He loved the way people looked at his car when he drove through the city streets. The engine was loud, and Marcus made it even louder because he wanted everyone to notice him. He wore expensive suits that cost thousands of dollars. His watch was made of real gold and diamonds. Everything about Marcus screamed that he had money and power, but Marcus had a big problem. He thought the rules did not apply to him. He drove too fast everywhere he went. When he saw a parking spot that said no parking, he parked there anyway. If there was a red light and no cars coming, he would drive right through it. Marcus believed that traffic laws were for poor people and regular folks. Rich people like him could do whatever they wanted. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus was running late for an important meeting at the bank. He had stayed up too late the night before at an expensive restaurant with his friends. They had drunk too much wine and laughed about how easy their lives were. Now Marcus felt sick and angry that he had to get up early. Marcus jumped into his red car and started driving fast toward downtown Providence. The streets were busy with people going to work. School buses were taking children to school. But Marcus did not care about anyone else on the road. He only cared about getting to his meeting on time. At the first red light, Marcus looked around and saw no police cars. He pressed the gas pedal and drove right through the red light. A woman with her baby in a stroller had to jump back onto the sidewalk. She yelled at Marcus, but he just laughed and kept driving. A few blocks later, Marcus saw a no parking sign in front of the bank building. But all the other parking spots were full, and Marcus did not want to walk far in his expensive shoes. He pulled his car right up to the curb and parked under the sign. A parking officer was writing tickets on the same street, but Marcus thought his fancy car would make the officer leave him alone. During his meeting, Marcus looked out the window and saw the parking officer writing a ticket for his car. Marcus was not worried. His family had connections everywhere in the city. One phone call from his father would make any ticket disappear. This had happened many times before. After the meeting, Marcus found 3 tickets on his car. One was for parking in a no parking zone. Another was for parking too close to a fire hydrant. The third was for having expired registration tags. Marcus had forgotten to renew his registration because he thought such small things were not important for someone like him. Marcus laughed when he saw the tickets. He threw them in his car and forgot about them. Over the next few weeks, more tickets came in the mail. Marcus got tickets for speeding, running red lights, and illegal parking. Cameras around the city had caught him breaking the law many times. But Marcus threw all the tickets in a drawer and never paid them. Marcus's secretary tried to remind him about the tickets. She told him that ignoring tickets could cause big problems, but Marcus just waved his hand and told her not to worry. He said his father would take care of everything with one phone call. The secretary looked worried, but she did not say anything more. 1 month later, Marcus got a letter in the mail that he could not ignore. It was from Providence Municipal Court. The letter said he had to appear in court on a specific date and time. If he did not come, a warrant would be issued for his arrest. Marcus read the letter twice and started to feel angry. Marcus called his father immediately. His father was in a meeting with other state senators, but Marcus did not care. He demanded that his father fix this problem right away. But his father told Marcus that court summons were serious business. Even senators could not make them disappear easily. Marcus would have to go to court and face the charges. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt a little bit scared. But his fear quickly turned back into anger. How dare some small-town court try to tell him what to do? Marcus decided he would show this judge exactly who he was dealing with. He would make it clear that people like him did not have to follow the same rules as everyone else. Marcus threw the court summons on his desk and made a decision. He would go to this court, but he would not go quietly. He would bring his most expensive lawyer and show this judge what real power looked like. Marcus smiled to himself, thinking about how easy it would be to intimidate a small-town judge who probably had never dealt with someone as important as him. Marcus spent the next week preparing for his court date like he was preparing for war. He was not going to let some small-town judge embarrass him in front of other people. Marcus believed he was smarter and more important than anyone who worked in the Providence courthouse. He was ready to prove it. The first thing Marcus did was call the most expensive lawyer in the city. James Mitchell charged $500 per hour and worked only for very rich clients. Marcus's father had used Mitchell many times to get out of trouble. Mitchell was known for being tough and mean in court. He did not care about being nice to judges or following proper manners. When Marcus met with Mitchell in his fancy office, he told the lawyer exactly what he wanted. Marcus did not want to pay the fines or do community service. He wanted all the charges dropped completely. Marcus explained that his family had political connections and lots of money. He was sure these things would impress the judge and make the case go away quickly. Mitchell listened to Marcus and looked at all the tickets and charges. There were 12 different violations. The evidence was very clear because cameras had recorded Marcus breaking the laws. Mitchell tried to explain that the case would be difficult to win, but Marcus did not want to hear about problems. He told Mitchell that failure was not an option. Marcus decided to research Judge Frank Caprio himself. He went on his computer and looked up information about the judge. Marcus found out that Judge Caprio had been working in Providence Municipal Court for many years. The judge was famous for being kind and understanding to people who came to his court. There were videos online showing Judge Caprio helping poor people and families with problems. But Marcus saw these videos in a different way than most people. Where others saw kindness and fairness, Marcus saw weakness. He thought Judge Caprio was too soft and emotional. Marcus believed that judges who cared about people's feelings were not strong enough to handle pressure from powerful families like his. Marcus watched video after video of Judge Caprio's court sessions. He saw the judge reduce fines for single mothers who could not afford to pay. He watched Judge Caprio dismiss charges for elderly people who made honest mistakes. Marcus laughed at what he called the judge's bleeding heart behavior. He was convinced that this judge would be easy to manipulate. Marcus made a plan for his court appearance. He would dress in his most expensive suit to show his wealth and status. He would bring Mitchell to intimidate the judge with legal threats. Most importantly, Marcus planned to mention his father's position as a state senator. He believed that dropping his father's name would make the judge nervous about making the wrong decision. Marcus also considered having his father make a phone call to the court before the hearing. State senators had influence over many parts of the government, including the court system. A well-timed call from his father could remind the judge that Marcus came from an important family. But Marcus decided to save this option for later if the judge did not cooperate during the hearing. The night before his court date, Marcus had dinner with his father at an expensive restaurant. Senator Thompson listened as Marcus explained his plan to intimidate Judge Caprio. The older man looked uncomfortable and tried to warn Marcus about being too aggressive in court. He told Marcus that judges did not like to be threatened or disrespected, but Marcus ignored his father's advice. He was convinced that his father was being too careful and old-fashioned. Marcus believed that in the modern world, money and connections were the only things that mattered. He thought his father's concerns came from a time when people still respected authority figures like judges. Marcus spent extra time that evening choosing his clothes for court. He picked his most expensive suit, which cost $3,000. His shoes were made in Italy and cost $800. His watch was a limited edition model that cost $15,000. Marcus wanted everyone in the courthouse to see immediately that he was wealthy and important. Marcus also prepared what he would say to Judge Caprio. He planned to speak in a commanding voice that showed confidence and authority. He would not ask the judge for mercy or apologize for his actions. Instead, Marcus would make it clear that prosecuting him was a waste of the court's time. He would suggest that the judge should focus on real criminals instead of bothering successful businessmen like himself. On the morning of his court date, Marcus woke up feeling excited rather than nervous. He saw this day as an opportunity to show his power and influence. Marcus had never lost a battle with authority figures before, and he was not planning to start now. He ate a big breakfast and drank extra coffee to make sure he would be sharp and aggressive in court. Marcus called Mitchell one more time to go over their strategy. The lawyer again tried to suggest a more humble approach, but Marcus cut him off. Marcus reminded Mitchell that he was paying the bills. and that the lawyer should follow his instructions. Mitchell agreed reluctantly, but he sounded worried about Marcus's aggressive plan. As Marcus drove toward the courthouse in his red sports car, he felt completely confident. He had money, connections, and the best lawyer in the city. Judge Caprio might be popular with poor people and families, but he had never faced someone like Marcus Thompson. Marcus was sure that by lunchtime all his charges would be dropped, and he would be free to continue living his life exactly as he pleased. Marcus pulled his bright red sports car into the courthouse parking lot with his music playing loud. Other people walking toward the courthouse turned to look at the expensive car and the well-dressed man stepping out of it. Marcus enjoyed the attention and made sure to slam his car door extra hard so more people would notice him. The courthouse was an old brick building that had been serving Providence for many decades. As Marcus walked up the front steps, he looked around with disgust. The building looked tired and worn compared to the shiny office towers where Marcus worked. Paint was peeling in some places, and the steps had cracks from years of use. Marcus thought the whole place looked beneath someone of his status. Inside the courthouse, Marcus was surprised by how busy it was. The hallways were filled with people of all ages waiting for their court appearances. Some were dressed nicely, but many wore simple clothes that showed they did not have much money. Marcus saw single mothers holding babies, elderly people with walking canes, and young adults who looked nervous about being in court. Marcus pulled out his expensive phone and started talking loudly about his important business deals. He wanted everyone around him to hear that he was different from them. He was not some common criminal or poor person who belonged in this courthouse. He was a successful businessman who was only there because of a misunderstanding that would be cleared up quickly. While Marcus was on his phone, he noticed people staring at him with unfriendly looks. A woman holding a crying baby moved away from him when he got too loud. An older man shook his head and whispered something to his wife. But Marcus did not care what these people thought about him. In his mind, their opinions did not matter because they were not important or successful like him. Marcus found the courtroom where his case would be heard. Outside the door, his lawyer James Mitchell was waiting for him. Mitchell looked professional in his dark suit, but Marcus could tell the lawyer seemed worried. Mitchell tried one more time to convince Marcus to be more respectful and humble during the hearing. Mitchell explained that Judge Caprio was well respected in Providence and had many years of experience. The lawyer said it would be better to apologize for the traffic violations and ask for reduced penalties. But Marcus became angry and told Mitchell that he was not paying him to give up before the fight even started. Marcus made it clear that he wanted an aggressive approach that would show the judge who had the real power. When the courtroom doors opened, Marcus walked in like he owned the place. The room was full of people waiting for their cases to be called. Marcus looked around and felt even more confident. Most of the other defendants looked worried or scared. Many were clearly struggling with money problems. Marcus thought these people would make him look even more impressive by comparison. The courtroom itself was formal but not fancy. There were wooden benches for people to sit on, and the judge's bench was raised above everyone else. American flags hung on both sides of the room. Everything about the place was designed to show respect for the law and the legal system. But Marcus saw it as just another place where his money and connections would get him what he wanted. As Marcus and Mitchell found seats near the front, Marcus continued talking on his phone. He spoke loudly about closing business deals and making lots of money. Other people in the courtroom looked annoyed by his behavior, but Marcus thought their reactions proved how different and superior he was to them. A court officer told everyone to turn off their phones and be quiet because court was about to begin. Marcus reluctantly ended his call, but made sure to tell the person on the other end that he was dealing with a minor legal issue that would be resolved quickly. He wanted everyone in the courtroom to hear that this was not a serious matter for someone like him. When Judge Frank Caprio entered the courtroom, everyone stood up as required by law. Marcus stood up too, but he did it slowly and with a bored expression on his face. He studied the judge carefully, looking for signs of weakness that he could use to his advantage. Judge Caprio was an older man with gray hair and a calm, serious expression. He wore the traditional black robes that judges wear in court. When he sat down and looked out at the courtroom, his eyes showed intelligence and experience. But Marcus still believed that this small-town judge would be no match for his wealth and family connections. The court session began with other cases being called first. Marcus watched as different people came forward to face the judge. He was surprised by what he saw. Judge Caprio listened carefully to each person's story. When a single mother explained that she could not afford a parking fine, the judge reduced the amount she had to pay. When an elderly man apologized for accidentally running a red light, the judge dismissed the case entirely. Marcus watched these interactions with growing confidence. He was convinced that Judge Caprio was exactly what he had expected, a soft-hearted judge who cared more about people's feelings than about enforcing the law. Marcus whispered to Mitchell that this would be even easier than they had planned. The judge was clearly someone who could be pushed around by people with authority and influence. But as Marcus continued watching, he noticed something that made him slightly uncomfortable. While Judge Caprio was kind and understanding, he was also clearly in complete control of his courtroom. When people were respectful and honest, the judge helped them. But when someone tried to lie or make excuses, Judge Caprio quickly saw through their dishonesty and became more strict. Marcus pushed away these uncomfortable thoughts. He reminded himself that he was not like these other people. He had power and money that would make Judge Caprio treat him differently. Marcus straightened his expensive tie and prepared to show everyone in the courtroom what real authority looked like. When the court officer called Marcus Thompson, the entire courtroom became quiet. Marcus stood up slowly and walked toward the front of the room like he was walking into his own office. He did not look nervous or worried like the other people who had appeared before the judge. Instead, Marcus walked with the confidence of someone who believed he was about to win an easy victory. Judge Caprio looked down at the papers in front of him and began reading the charges. There were 12 different traffic violations, including speeding, running red lights, illegal parking, and driving with expired registration. The judge's voice was calm and professional as he read each charge. The evidence was clear because traffic cameras had recorded Marcus breaking the law multiple times. Mitchell, Marcus's expensive lawyer, started to stand up to speak for his client. This was the normal way court hearings worked. Lawyers usually spoke for their clients and tried to negotiate with the judge for reduced penalties. But before Mitchell could say a word, Marcus pushed past him and stepped forward to address Judge Caprio directly. Marcus's voice was loud and demanding when he began to speak. He did not show any respect for the court or acknowledgement that he had done anything wrong. Instead, Marcus spoke to Judge Caprio like he was talking to a servant who had made a mistake. "Your Honor," Marcus said, but his tone made the respectful words sound sarcastic. "I am here today because of what I can only call a complete waste of everyone's time. These charges against me are ridiculous, and I demand that they be dropped immediately." The courtroom became even quieter. People sitting in the benches looked shocked by Marcus's aggressive tone. Even other defendants who were waiting for their own cases turned to stare at Marcus with surprise. No one had ever heard someone speak to Judge Caprio with such disrespect. Judge Caprio's expression did not change, but his eyes became more focused on Marcus. The judge folded his hands and waited to hear what Marcus would say next. This calm reaction made Marcus think that his aggressive approach was working. He believed the judge was already becoming intimidated. Marcus continued his attack on the court and the charges against him. He claimed that successful businessmen like himself should not have to follow the same traffic laws as regular people. Marcus argued that his time was too valuable to waste sitting in traffic or looking for legal parking spaces. He said that people who contributed more to society deserve special treatment from the legal system. "Judge Caprio," Marcus said, speaking the judge's name like it was something dirty, "I think you need to understand exactly who you are dealing with here. I am not some common criminal who belongs in this courthouse. I make more money in a month than most people in this room make in a year. My family has connections throughout this state, including my father, who is a state senator." Mitchell, the expensive lawyer, looked horrified by what his client was saying. He tried to grab Marcus's arm and pull him back, but Marcus shook him off and kept talking. Mitchell knew that threatening a judge was one of the worst things someone could do in court. But Marcus was too angry and arrogant to listen to advice. Marcus raised his voice even louder and pointed his finger at Judge Caprio. The courtroom was completely silent except for Marcus's angry words. Even the court officers looked surprised by what they were hearing. "Let me make something very clear to you, Judge," Marcus said, his voice full of threat and anger. "My father has influence over judicial appointments in this state. He knows the governor personally and has friends in the state legislature. If you want to keep your job in this little courthouse, you will dismiss these charges right now and let me get back to my important business." The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Everyone in the courtroom understood what Marcus was saying. He was threatening to use his family's political connections to destroy Judge Caprio's career, if the judge did not do what Marcus wanted. This kind of threat was not just disrespectful, it was also illegal and could result in serious criminal charges. Marcus was not finished with his attack on Judge Caprio. He had saved his most insulting comments for last. Marcus looked around the courtroom at all the other defendants and then back at the judge with a sneer on his face. "Judge, I have been watching you this morning, and I can see that you spend your time helping poor people and criminals avoid the consequences of their actions. You seem to think this makes you a good person, but what it really makes you is weak. Judges who care more about people's feelings than about enforcing the law have no business wearing those robes." Marcus pointed at Judge Caprio's judicial robes with contempt. He was suggesting that the judge was not qualified to be a judge and should not have the authority to make legal decisions. This was perhaps the most insulting thing Marcus could have said to someone who had dedicated his entire career to serving justice fairly and honestly. The final part of Marcus's threat was the most dangerous. He leaned forward toward the judge's bench and spoke in a voice that everyone in the courtroom could hear clearly. "I suggest you think very carefully about your next decision, Judge Caprio. My father will be very interested to hear how his son was treated in your courtroom today. One phone call from him could start an investigation into how you run this court. I would hate for your career to end because you made the wrong choice about my case." When Marcus finally stopped talking, the silence in the courtroom was complete. No one moved or made any sound. Mitchell looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The other defendants stared at Marcus with shock and disgust. Even the court officers seemed stunned by what they had just witnessed. Marcus stood there with a satisfied smile on his face, convinced that his threats had worked perfectly. He believed that Judge Caprio was now too scared to do anything except dismiss all the charges and let Marcus leave the courthouse as a free man. Marcus had never been more wrong about anything in his entire life. Judge Frank Caprio sat quietly for a long moment after Marcus finished his threatening speech. The judge's face showed no emotion, but his eyes had changed. Where there had been patience and kindness before, there was now something much stronger and more serious. The entire courtroom waited to see what would happen next. When Judge Caprio finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. He did not shout or get angry like Marcus had expected. Instead, the judge spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades earning respect through fairness and wisdom. His words carried more power than all of Marcus's threats combined. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio said, looking directly into Marcus's eyes, "in 37 years of serving this court, I have heard many things. I have listened to people who were angry, scared, desperate, and sorry. But I have rarely heard someone speak with such complete disrespect for this courtroom, for the law and for the people who seek justice here." Marcus started to interrupt, but Judge Caprio raised his hand slightly and Marcus found himself unable to speak. The judge's quiet command filled the entire room. Everyone could see that Judge Caprio was completely in control of the situation, despite Marcus's attempts to intimidate him. Judge Caprio continued speaking in his calm, measured voice. "You seem to believe that your family's money and political connections make you special. You think that being wealthy means you do not have to follow the same laws as everyone else. But let me explain something very important to you, Mr. Thompson. In this courtroom, there is only one thing that matters: the law." The judge gestured toward the American flag hanging beside his bench. That flag represents a country where everyone is supposed to be equal under the law. It does not matter if you are rich or poor, powerful or weak. When you break the law, you face the consequences. That is what justice means. Marcus tried to look confident, but people in the courtroom could see that he was starting to become nervous. Judge Caprio's calm strength was very different from what Marcus had expected. The judge was not intimidated by threats or impressed by wealth. He was simply doing his job with dignity and authority. Judge Caprio then addressed Marcus's threats about his father's political influence. The judge's voice remained calm, but his words cut through Marcus's arrogance like a sharp knife. "You mentioned that your father is a state senator, and you seem to think this should frighten me. But let me tell you something about your father, Mr. Thompson. Senator Thompson is a man I respect even when I disagree with his politics. He earned his position through years of public service. He would be ashamed to know that his son thinks family connections should help him avoid responsibility for breaking the law. Marcus's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. Judge Caprio was right about his father. Senator Thompson had always taught Marcus that with privilege came responsibility. The senator had built his career on helping people, not on helping his family avoid consequences for bad behavior. Judge Caprio was not finished with his response to Marcus's threats. The judge leaned forward slightly and spoke directly to Marcus about the dangers of trying to intimidate a court. You suggested that I should be worried about keeping my job. You threatened to have your father investigate how I run this courtroom. Let me be very clear about something, Mr. Thompson. Threatening a judge is a serious crime. What you have done here today could result in criminal charges against you. Every word you have spoken has been recorded by the court reporter and filmed by our cameras. Marcus looked around the courtroom for the first time and noticed the cameras that recorded every court session for Judge Caprio's television show. His face became even redder as he realized that his embarrassing behavior would be seen by thousands of people. All his threats and arrogant comments were being recorded for everyone to see. Judge Caprio continued his calm but devastating response. You called me weak because I show compassion to people who come before this court. You suggested that caring about people's situations makes me unfit to be a judge. But let me explain the difference between weakness and strength, Mr. Thompson. The judge gestured toward the other people in the courtroom who were waiting for their cases to be heard. These people came to court today with respect for the law and for this courtroom. When they made mistakes, they admitted them. When they had problems, they asked for help honestly. That takes real strength and character. Judge Caprio's voice became slightly stronger as he continued. You, on the other hand, came here with arrogance and threats. You tried to use your family's name to avoid responsibility for your actions. You showed disrespect for everyone in this room. That is not strength, Mr. Thompson. That is the behavior of someone who has never learned what real character means. Marcus tried one more time to interrupt and argue with the judge, but Judge Caprio was not finished speaking. The judge's next words hit Marcus like a physical blow. You seem to think that success means you can do whatever you want without consequences. But real success is measured by how you treat other people, especially those who have less power than you do. By that measure, Mr. Thompson, you are not successful at all. You are simply a young man who has never learned the important lessons that make someone a good person. The courtroom remained completely silent as Judge Caprio delivered his final thoughts about Marcus's behavior. Everyone could see that the judge was not angry or upset. Instead, he was disappointed by what he saw as a waste of potential and privilege. You have advantages that most people in this courtroom will never have. You have money, education, and family connections. You could use these gifts to help other people and make your community better. Instead, you use them to try to avoid responsibility and to look down on others. That is perhaps the saddest thing I have seen in all my years as a judge. Judge Caprio sat back in his chair and looked at Marcus with an expression that was both firm and sad. Marcus stood there feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. All his confidence and arrogance had disappeared, replaced by the terrible realization that he had made a huge mistake. As Judge Caprio's words sank in, Marcus felt something he had never experienced before in his adult life. His legs began to feel weak and his hands started to shake slightly. The confident smile that had been on his face just minutes earlier was completely gone. For the first time, Marcus understood that he was not in control of the situation. Marcus looked around the courtroom and saw the faces of the other people who had witnessed his shameful behavior. An elderly woman in the front row was shaking her head with disgust. A young mother holding her baby looked at Marcus like he was something terrible. Even the court officers, who saw difficult people every day, seemed shocked by how badly Marcus had behaved. The worst part for Marcus was seeing his own lawyer's reaction. James Mitchell, the expensive attorney Marcus had hired to intimidate the judge, looked completely embarrassed to be associated with his client. Mitchell was staring down at his papers and clearly wished he could disappear. The lawyer knew that Marcus's behavior had destroyed any chance they might have had to negotiate a fair settlement. Marcus began to remember all the things he had said to Judge Caprio just a few minutes earlier. He had called the judge weak and unfit for his job. He had threatened to use his father's political connections to destroy the judge's career. He had suggested that rich people like himself should not have to follow the same laws as everyone else. Now, hearing his own words echoing in his mind, Marcus realized how terrible he had sounded. For his entire life, Marcus had been surrounded by people who told him he was special and important. His wealthy friends never challenged his bad behavior because they acted the same way. His employees at the bank agreed with everything he said because they were afraid of losing their jobs. Even his family had always protected him from the consequences of his actions. But Judge Caprio was different from everyone else Marcus had ever met. The judge was not impressed by Marcus's money or scared of his family's political connections. Judge Caprio had spent his entire career dealing with all kinds of people, from the poorest citizens to the most powerful politicians. Marcus's threats and arrogance meant nothing to someone with that much experience and integrity. Marcus began to understand that Judge Caprio was not a small-town judge who could be pushed around easily. The judge had a reputation that reached far beyond Providence. People all over the country knew Judge Caprio as a fair and honest judge who treated everyone with respect. Marcus had been so focused on his own importance that he had never bothered to learn about the man he was trying to intimidate. The television cameras in the courtroom suddenly seemed much more frightening to Marcus. He realized that his embarrassing behavior would be broadcast on television for everyone to see. His friends, his co-workers, and his business clients would all watch him threaten and insult a respected judge. The video would probably be shared on social media and could follow him for the rest of his life. Marcus thought about his father and felt sick to his stomach. Senator Thompson had always been proud of his son's success in business, but when the senator saw this video, he would be ashamed and disappointed. Marcus had used his father's name to try to threaten a judge, which could damage his father's political career. The senator had worked for decades to build his reputation, and Marcus had put all of that at risk with his selfish behavior. Marcus also began to think about his job at the bank. His employers valued their reputation in the community very highly. When they saw their employee threatening a judge on television, they would be furious. Marcus realized that his career could be seriously damaged by what had happened in the courtroom. All the success and money he was so proud of could disappear because of his arrogance. But the worst realization for Marcus was understanding how wrong he had been about Judge Caprio. Marcus had watched the judge show kindness and compassion to other people, and had mistaken these qualities for weakness. He had thought that a judge who cared about people's problems would be easy to intimidate and control. Now Marcus could see that Judge Caprio's kindness came from a position of strength, not weakness. The judge was secure enough in his own authority that he could afford to be generous with people who deserved help. But when someone like Marcus showed disrespect for the court and the law, Judge Caprio could be as firm and strong as necessary. Marcus looked at Judge Caprio's face and saw something that made him feel even worse. The judge was not angry or upset with Marcus. Instead, Judge Caprio looked disappointed and sad. It was clear that the judge had hoped Marcus would show some respect for the court and some understanding of his mistakes. Instead, Marcus had proven that he was exactly the kind of spoiled, arrogant person that the judge had hoped he was not. Marcus tried to think of something to say that would make the situation better, but his mind was completely blank. How could he apologize for threatening a judge? How could he explain that he had not meant to be so disrespectful? The truth was that Marcus had meant every word he said. He really had believed that his money and family connections made him better than everyone else in the courtroom. The silence in the courtroom felt like it lasted forever. Marcus stood there feeling more alone and foolish than he had ever felt in his life. All the confidence and arrogance that had carried him through life had disappeared in just a few minutes. He was no longer the powerful businessman who could get whatever he wanted. He was just a young man who had made terrible choices and was about to face the consequences. Marcus finally understood that Judge Caprio had been right about everything. Marcus had wasted the advantages he had been given in life. Instead of using his privileges to help other people, he had used them to look down on others and avoid responsibility. Instead of showing gratitude for his good fortune, he had acted like he deserved special treatment just for being wealthy. Standing there in front of Judge Caprio, Marcus realized that he was about to learn a lesson that his money and family connections could not protect him from. Judge Caprio opened the folder containing Marcus's case file and began to speak in his calm, authoritative voice. The entire courtroom remained silent as everyone waited to hear what punishment Marcus would receive for his terrible behavior and multiple traffic violations. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio began, You came into my courtroom today with 12 separate traffic violations. The evidence against you is clear and undeniable. Traffic cameras recorded you speeding, running red lights, and parking illegally on multiple occasions. You also drove with expired registration, which shows a complete disregard for basic legal requirements. Marcus stood frozen in place, finally understanding that his threats and arrogance had only made his situation much worse. Judge Caprio continued reading through the charges, and each one sounded more serious than Marcus had originally thought. But your traffic violations are not the most serious issue we face today, Judge Caprio continued. Your behavior in this courtroom has been completely unacceptable. You have shown disrespect for the law, for this court, and for every person who seeks justice here. You have also made threats against this court, which is a serious criminal offense. Judge Caprio looked directly at Marcus as he explained the full consequences of what Marcus had done. Mr. Thompson, threatening a judge is a crime that could result in additional criminal charges being filed against you. Your words and actions today have been recorded and could be used as evidence in a separate criminal case. Marcus felt his knees become weak as he realized that his problems were much bigger than just paying some traffic fines. He could actually face criminal charges for threatening Judge Caprio. This could mean more court appearances, more legal expenses, and possibly even time in jail. Judge Caprio then announced the penalties for Marcus's traffic violations, and they were severe. For each speeding violation, Marcus would pay the maximum fine allowed by law. For running red lights, he would pay additional maximum fines. For the illegal parking violations, more maximum fines. The total amount of money Marcus would have to pay was over $8,000, but the financial penalties were just the beginning. Judge Caprio also sentenced Marcus to 100 hours of community service. This was far more community service than most people received for traffic violations. Marcus would have to spend 100 hours working for free to help his community, doing whatever jobs the court assigned to him. Your community service will be performed at local homeless shelters, food banks, and programs that help families in need, Judge Caprio explained. Perhaps spending time with people who face real hardships will help you develop some understanding of what truly matters in life. Judge Caprio was not finished with Marcus's punishment. The judge also ordered that Marcus's driver's license be suspended for 6 months. This meant Marcus would not be able to drive his expensive sports car or any other vehicle during that time. For someone who had used driving as a way to show off his wealth and status, losing his license was a particularly painful consequence. During your license suspension, Mr. Thompson, you will need to find other ways to get to work and handle your daily responsibilities. This will give you time to think about how your reckless driving endangered other people on the roads. Marcus also had to attend mandatory driving safety classes and anger management counseling. Judge Caprio explained that these programs were designed to help Marcus understand the serious consequences of aggressive and dangerous behavior, both on the road and in other parts of his life. The judge then addressed the issue of Marcus's threats and disrespectful behavior in the courtroom. Mr. Thompson, I am not going to file additional criminal charges against you for your threats today, but I want you to understand that your behavior came very close to crossing that line. Any future disrespect toward this court or any other court will result in serious criminal consequences. Marcus tried to speak for the first time since Judge Caprio had begun announcing his punishment. Your Honor, I want to apologize for what I said earlier. I was wrong and I'm sorry. But his apology sounded weak and desperate, and everyone in the courtroom could tell that Marcus was only sorry because he was being punished. Judge Caprio listened to Marcus's apology but was not impressed by it. Mr. Thompson, your apology might mean something if it had come before you were sentenced, or if you had shown any genuine remorse for your actions. But apologizing only after you receive punishment suggests that you are sorry about the consequences, not about your behavior. The judge continued with his final thoughts about Marcus's case. You have been given many advantages in life, Mr. Thompson. You have education, wealth, and family connections that most people can only dream of having. Yet you have used these gifts in ways that harm your community and show disrespect for the law. Judge Caprio's voice became slightly softer as he delivered what seemed like fatherly advice to Marcus. I hope that the consequences you face today will help you become a better person. I hope you will learn to use your advantages to help others instead of looking down on them. If you do that, then these penalties will have served their purpose. The judge then made it clear that Marcus's case was closed. Mr. Thompson, you have 30 days to begin your community service and to enroll in the required classes. Your fines must be paid within 60 days. If you fail to complete any part of your sentence, additional penalties will be imposed, and criminal charges may be filed. As Judge Caprio finished speaking, Marcus realized that his life was about to change dramatically. He would lose his license, pay thousands of dollars in fines, and spend months doing community service. Most importantly, his reputation was completely destroyed. The video of his courtroom behavior would follow him for years to come. Marcus's expensive lawyer gathered his papers quickly, clearly eager to leave the courthouse as soon as possible. Mitchell knew that representing Marcus had been a mistake, and he wanted to distance himself from the embarrassing case. As Marcus prepared to leave the courtroom, he looked around one more time at all the people who had witnessed his downfall. Their faces showed a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. They had seen an arrogant rich man get exactly what he deserved, and most of them seemed pleased with Judge Caprio's tough sentence. Marcus walked out of the courthouse feeling completely defeated and humiliated. For the first time in his life, his money and family connections had not protected him from facing real consequences for his actions. 6 months after his humiliating court appearance, Marcus Thompson was a completely different person than the arrogant young man who had threatened Judge Caprio. The consequences of that terrible day had changed every aspect of his life, but in ways that Marcus had never expected. The first few weeks after his court sentencing had been the most difficult period of Marcus's entire life. The video of his courtroom behavior had spread quickly on social media and local news stations. Thousands of people had watched Marcus threaten and insult Judge Caprio, and the comments were not kind. People called Marcus spoiled, arrogant, and entitled. Many said he deserved even worse punishment than what Judge Caprio had given him. Marcus's employer at the investment bank had called him into a meeting the day after the video went viral. The bank's executives were furious that one of their employees had embarrassed their company on television. They told Marcus that his behavior reflected poorly on their business and their values. Although they did not fire him immediately, Marcus was removed from his position working with important clients. His salary was reduced, and he was warned that any future problems would result in immediate termination. The reaction from Marcus's wealthy friends and social circle was almost as painful as losing his job responsibilities. People who had enjoyed Marcus's expensive parties and business connections suddenly stopped returning his phone calls. They were embarrassed to be associated with someone who had become famous for all the wrong reasons. Marcus learned quickly that many of his friendships had been based on what he could provide for others, not on genuine caring or respect. The most painful conversation Marcus had was with his father, Senator Thompson. The senator was deeply disappointed in his son's behavior and worried about how the incident might affect his own political career. Senator Thompson told Marcus that he had spent decades building relationships based on respect and integrity, and Marcus's actions had put all of that work at risk. But as difficult as these early weeks were, Marcus slowly began to understand that losing his old life might not be entirely bad. Without his expensive car and wealthy lifestyle to hide behind, Marcus had to face who he really was as a person, and what he discovered was not pleasant. Marcus's community service assignment was at a homeless shelter in downtown Providence. At first he was angry about having to spend his time serving meals to people he considered beneath him. But as the weeks passed, Marcus began to listen to the stories of the people he was helping. He met military veterans who had lost their homes due to medical problems. He served meals to single mothers who worked multiple jobs but still could not afford rent. He helped elderly people who had lost their life savings due to medical emergencies. These experiences slowly opened Marcus's eyes to a world he had never really seen before. Despite having lived in Providence his entire life, Marcus had never understood how many people in his own city were struggling just to survive. He had been so focused on making money and showing off his wealth that he had never noticed the real problems affecting his community. One person who made a particularly strong impression on Marcus was an 8-year-old boy named David who came to the shelter with his mother. David's father had been killed in a car accident, and his mother was working 2 jobs to try to keep their family together. Despite all their hardships, David was polite, grateful, and always helped other people at the shelter. Marcus realized that this child, who had almost nothing, showed more character and kindness than Marcus had ever displayed in his privileged life. As Marcus continued his community service, he began to develop genuine relationships with the people he was helping. They taught him about resilience, gratitude, and the importance of helping others. Marcus started to understand that real success was not measured by how much money someone made or what kind of car they drove. Real success was about making a positive difference in other people's lives. Marcus also began attending the anger management and driving safety classes that Judge Caprio had ordered. In these sessions, Marcus learned about the consequences of aggressive and selfish behavior. He came to understand that his reckless driving had put innocent people at risk of serious injury or death. For the first time, Marcus felt genuine shame about his past actions, not just embarrassment about being caught. The 6 months without a driver's license had forced Marcus to use public transportation and walk to many places. This experience gave him a new perspective on his city and brought him into contact with ordinary working people he had never noticed before. Marcus began to appreciate the bus drivers, store clerks, and other service workers who kept the city running, but were often ignored or looked down upon by wealthy people like he used to be. As his community service hours neared completion, Marcus realized that he did not want to stop volunteering. The work at the homeless shelter had become the most meaningful part of his life. Marcus decided to continue volunteering even after his court-ordered service was finished. He also began donating money to help the shelter expand its programs for families with children. Marcus's relationship with his father slowly began to improve as Senator Thompson saw the genuine changes in his son's character. The senator was proud to learn that Marcus was continuing his volunteer work and using his business skills to help organize fundraising events for local charities. 10 months after his court appearance, Marcus decided to write a letter to Judge Caprio. In the letter, Marcus thanked the judge for the tough sentence that had changed his life. Marcus explained how his community service had opened his eyes to the real problems in his community and had taught him the importance of helping others. He apologized sincerely for his disrespectful behavior in court and acknowledged that Judge Caprio had been right about everything. Marcus also wrote about how he was using his business experience to help organize job training programs for people at the homeless shelter. He had discovered that many homeless people had valuable skills but needed help finding stable employment. Marcus was working with other business leaders to create opportunities for these individuals to rebuild their lives. Judge Caprio was impressed by Marcus's letter and agreed to meet with him privately in his office. During their conversation, the judge could see that Marcus had genuinely learned from his mistakes and had developed real compassion for others. Judge Caprio told Marcus that this transformation was exactly what the justice system was supposed to accomplish, not just punishment, but real change that made people better citizens. Marcus left Judge Caprio's office feeling grateful for the harsh lesson he had received in court almost a year earlier. He understood now that the judge's tough sentence had been an act of kindness, not cruelty. By forcing Marcus to face real consequences for his actions, Judge Caprio had given him the opportunity to become a better person. Marcus continued to volunteer at the homeless shelter and eventually started his own nonprofit organization to help families transition from homelessness to stable housing. His work became well known throughout Providence, and people began to see Marcus as an example of how someone could change their life and use their privileges to help others. Years later, when people asked Marcus about the most important day of his life, he always talked about the morning he stood in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom and learned what real justice and real character meant. That terrible, humiliating day had turned out to be the beginning of the best part of his life.